Hello, buenas tardes. No hablo español, lo siento. My Spanish sucks, so I'm going to be speaking in English today. And yeah, I guess today I just kind of have a story. When I was 6, so 17 years ago, I'm 24 now, I started a volunteer project, and it never really stopped, and it became part of my life. So I'd like to share with you guys a story of why I started, why I kept on going, and why I volunteer today. Next slide, please. So here's my grade 1 class. So there's me in the tall row in the back where I belong. But I remember when I was in grade 1, life was super simple. You went to school, you didn't get your teachers too angry, you waited for recess to happen, had recess, then you waited for it to happen again. It was like this nice cycle. And I remember life was really, really simple. That's all there was to it, really. You tried it in class, but you didn't have to try too hard, so it was the good life. And I remember we used to have this thing at my school where every year we do like an annual charity fundraising project thing. Like it was what we had to do every year. So I remember when preschool we did like a canned food drive, and then we did a raise money for cancer thing. So it was just part of the routine. We had to do it every year. So this year, my teacher, her name was Mrs. Prest, she brought in this list, this big long list of things that people in developing countries didn't have that we had, apparently. We didn't really understand too much about it, but we said, okay, let's get this over with. So my teacher was like, yeah, this year we're going to be raising money for people in developing countries, and here's some things that we can save up for, we can fundraise for. And on the list was things like 1 cent would buy a pencil, $2 would buy a blanket, $5 would buy five hot lunches, and so on and so on. And then she got to the point where she said $70 would buy a well, so about 1,000 pesos. And then she explained to us in one sentence that kids our age couldn't go to school and were dying because they didn't have clean water. And we were 6, so we didn't understand it all. So we were like, why don't they just go to the water fountain? Duh, problem solved. And so my teacher had to explain to us, like the kids we were, no, not everyone has water fountains. Sometimes kids your age have to walk as far as 5 kilometers to get water, because there's no water near them. And we didn't understand how far 5 kilometers was, so I remember my teacher explained it to us by saying 5,000 steps. That didn't help either, because I couldn't count that high. But I remember I counted the steps it took me to get from my classroom to the water fountain, and I counted 10. And when we were younger, I remember my teachers had this thing, like these concepts of sharing and justice, and they kind of just like thrust them upon us. Like if something wasn't fair in the classroom, your teacher or someone in a position of power would do all they can to make it equal. So when we heard this, we were actually a little ticked off. We were angry at my teacher because we felt like we had been lied to. And my teacher kind of just shrugged and said, you know what, if you want to do something about it, you could raise money for something on this list. And I remember she was going through the different things on the list, and we were deciding who was going to fundraise money for what. And the well came up, and it was the most expensive thing. And she asked for someone to volunteer to help fundraise for it. And then I raised my hand, and I said, I want to fundraise for that. And my teacher was a little confused. She raised an eyebrow, because I wasn't exactly at the top of the class. I wasn't at the bottom either, I don't think. I was kind of just there, like wallpaper. I didn't participate, I didn't raise my hand, I didn't do anything. So my teacher was like, Ryan, are you sure you want to do this? This is a big part of our fundraiser. Can you do this alone? And I was like, don't worry, I've got a plan. I'm gonna go home to my parents, I'm gonna ask them for $70, they'll give it to me, and then I'll come back and give it to you. And that'll be that. Because it's not like I wanted to buy something for myself. My parents would obviously see that I was trying to be a virtuous, good person while we were being taught in school, and give me the money, and then I could go back to having fun at recess guilt-free. So I thought it was a stellar plan. Went home to my folks, can I have $70 to build a well? And they kind of just like tilted their heads and said, aw, that's cute. But no, and ignored me. yeah, I couldn't let it go because I just had this in my mind that if I could just raise $70, it would buy a well and bring the entire world clean water. So I was a little naive, but I remember I pestered them about it for days, and it got to the point where we were having this sit-down Sunday family dinner. And I remember my mother used to have this thing where she hated it when we pointed. She thought pointing was the most rude thing a person could do. So you just don't point around my mom or fear the consequences kind of thing. So I remember we were having this Sunday dinner, and I remember I looked at my mom, and I said, "You don't get it. People are dying because they don't have clean water, and you," and I pointed right at her, "you didn't help them." So I got a timeout, but afterwards my folks saw that I was serious, so they sat me down and they said, "You know what, we're not just going to give you the money because then you wouldn't learn anything, but if you're serious about it, you can do extra household chores, so housework, on top of the stuff you already do, and at the end of each week we'll give you something magical called an allowance. And then if you're serious about it, you can raise that money up for this well." So I already had to do things like make my bed, help with the dishes, but now I was told I had to do things like vacuum, wash windows, shovel snow. That one's not as easy as it sounds. And all these different things, and I get a couple dollars at the end of each week. And I was really motivated, so I started working and doing all these things. And I remember actually, next slide please. There's me telling the story in my excellent handwriting. But I remember I kept on doing all these chores, and the school project, it was supposed to last, it was a Lent school project, because I went to a Catholic school, so it was supposed to last 40 days. And by the time 40 days had gone by, I'd raised the grand total of $25. So I failed, and my teacher was a little bit disappointed actually, but I just had that idea. If I could just raise 70 bucks, then I would build this well and it would give everyone clean water. So I kept on working, I kept on doing chores and different things, and it got to the point where I actually surpassed my goal, and I raised $75. And it took me 4 months, but I was excited. I was going to bring the world clean water. Next slide, please. By the time I raised the money, my school actually, the fundraiser was long over and they wouldn't accept the money. So we found an organization in Ottawa that built clean water wells. So I was really excited. I got all dressed up in what we used to wear in the 90s with my Batman tie and suspenders. And I was going to build a well, and I had this cookie tin full of change, and I got the day off of school, I went in, and I was really excited. And they kind of did the same thing my parents did when I came home with the idea. They kind of tilted their heads and said, "Oh, it's adorable, but it's going to cost a lot more than $70 to build a well. It's going to cost $2,000, so like 30,000 pesos. But good work, off you go." But I said I would just do more chores. My math still wasn't, up to par. But, so I came home and I started doing different chores and different things, and my parents sat me down and they said, "You know what, you should feel proud of what you did. What you did may not build a well, but it helped, and it's a lot more than what a lot of people would have done. You should feel proud. Now, stop." But I had that idea in my head. So I remember I decided I had to kind of expand my comfort zone. So I went back to my school and I tried to get my friends involved, saying, "Hey, we got to fundraise money for this well. It's just going to be a little bit more. It's important." But my friend said, "No, are you crazy? That was months ago. Let it go." And I couldn't let it go. So I remember I had to kind of bridge the interest. So I remember, are Pokemon cards still cool? I know with this group especially they're cool, right? Well, this is when Pokemon cards first came out, so they're like at the pinnacle of how cool they were going to get. We were 6. So I remember my first fundraiser was a Pokemon card raffle. And it was exciting, and I kind of helped bridge like water facts into the fundraiser and all this different stuff, and we ended up raising a little bit of money. A few of my friends got involved, and it was great. And my teacher saw what we were doing and said, "Oh, you're still doing that. I can't believe you have an attention span that lasts longer than 5 minutes. That's great." And we said, "Yeah." And then she's like, "Would you like to give a presentation to the class?" I didn't really want to, but my folks said I had to expand my comfort zone if I was going to ever make an impact, so I did. Then the other grade 1 teacher heard that someone actually gave a presentation and said, "Will you give a presentation to my class?" And I said, "Okay, I'll try." And then I remember my first speech was to the Kemptville Rotary Club when I was 7 years old. And so I was giving this speech to all these Rotarians, so people who were like 50, 60, 70 years old, who volunteer in the community. And I remember when I was a kid, I went to a thing called speech therapy. Did anyone here go to speech therapy? No one? Yes, thank God I'm not alone. Okay, so speech therapy is a thing where you couldn't pronounce certain words or certain phrases, so I couldn't say my PHs, my THs, or something like thunder, I'd say thunder, and I stuttered. So when I was trying to say something, it was very hard to get out. And when I was a kid, it was just all over the place. So it was very difficult to understand me, and a lot of the words that I said didn't get across. But the message did. Here was this kid, there wasn't anything too remarkable about me, who wanted to build this wall and make this difference. And from that point on, it kind of became less of my project and more of everyone's project. I did chores for my neighbors, and they donated a little bit of money. Some of my friends did chores for their parents, and it became something that my community became a part of. Next slide, please. And then it got to the point where we were actually able to raise that $2,000. And it went towards the completion of a well at Angola Primary School in northern Uganda. And that school got the first clean water source it ever had. So it was kind of neat, actually. The school enrollment, it jumped from 700 to 1,400, all the way up to over 2,000 students, just because the well was put in. So it was great, and that's actually when I realized that one well wasn't going to bring the world clean water, that it's going to take a few more wells. So I kept on fundraising and doing different things. Next slide, please. And then I was really lucky, actually. When I was 9 years old, my neighbors, they used to travel a lot for a living. So for Christmas one year, they gave my family air mile points, so we were actually able to go see the well. And I remember I went, and I would have been 9, and there was this huge celebration at the school. There were over 5,000 people that came from the surrounding community. There was a feast, a celebration, and everyone was just so happy, so pumped, because they had clean water. Now still, I don't have a smile that lights up on my face because I can have a shower in the morning or a glass of water. So to see something that I considered so insignificant, to have that much of an impact on someone's life where you're willing to celebrate, it helped me put in perspective what I needed to be happy, kind of thing. And then when I came back, I was reinvigorated to keep on going and keep on fundraising. Next slide, please. So I remember I came back, and the story got bigger. It became less about my community and more about the country. Everyone got involved. And then the world. It was on the Oprah Winfrey Show. It was the cover of a Reader's Digest article. There was a documentary done. And it became even less of my project and so much more of the community that we were actually able to establish something called the Ryan's Well Foundation. And Ryan's Well has been around for 15 years now, and we've been able to do a total of 1,020 water projects in 16 countries all around the world, not just in Africa, but in Haiti, South America, India. And we've been able to bring clean water to over 850,000 people. So it's kind of bizarre to think that all of that happened because of my overdue, failed grade 1 school project. When I was in grade 1, I literally thought that one well would bring everyone in the world clean water. I was the least qualified person to tackle the world's water crisis. But at the same time, the fact that I thought that I could actually make a difference, and I thought that I could, ended up in all this good being done. So sometimes you have to think like a 6-year-old if you're going to do anything. Next slide, please. So just to give you a story about how this can affect someone's life is when I was in grade 2, so a year after the well was built, my teacher heard about what happened and thought it was really cool, but thought we could expand on the project and all get pen pals at the school where the well was built. So like writing buddies, so you write back and forth kind of thing. And my writing buddy ended up to be this kid named Jimmy. Jimmy went to school before the well was built and then after the well was built. Before the well was built, Jimmy used to have to get water for his family as part of his job. So he used to have to get up at midnight and get 2 big jerry cans, and there wasn't a well in his village or at his school. So he used to walk, it was 6 kilometers for him, to the nearest well, and then come back, and then do it again, and then do it one more time. And then I like it when Jimmy tells the story, because then he would say, then I would have the privilege to go to school. When I was a kid, going to school wasn't a privilege, it's something you were forced to do. But when the well was built, he was actually able to go to school in the morning and bring the water home at the end of the day and not have to fall asleep in class. So to see that something as simple as water gave him the power to have an education is something that I don't think we should take for granted. Next slide, please.
So a question that I kind of want you guys to think about today, or maybe next week, 17 years from now, it doesn't really matter, is a question of what are you passionate about? What am I passionate about? And when I was a kid, when I was 6, I was lucky. When I took those 10 steps to the water fountain, it was something that I couldn't ignore, that I had to do something about it. But at the same time, I think in the last 17 years of doing different initiatives and fundraising and all these different things, the hardest thing I've ever had to do was raise my hand in my grade 1 class. I was not a hand raiser. I did not want to participate at all. I was very happy being in my corner. But I think when we find those things in life, and it's not necessarily with water, we all care about different things, that when you find that thing, you have the courage to raise your hand, take a step forward, do something small. Because there's so many issues in this world that need people to care about them and need people invested. If I had thought like an adult when I was a kid, if I had thought like a 24-year-old mind, I would have looked at all the problems with what would come with trying to solve the problem. I would have been very cynical about what I could actually do. And I would have probably not done anything. So sometimes you need to understand that you need to start from somewhere. And even if you're not the most experienced, or you don't come from power or influence or money, or you're not the most qualified to do something about a certain issue, sometimes those are the only people that can do something. Next slide, please. And another thing I heard a lot, especially when I was a kid and after I fundraised the 70 bucks, is that there was a lot of people telling me, you know what, you did a good job, but you need to stop. You know, you didn't do what you thought you set out to do, there's a lot more to be done, but, you know, stop. And I kept on fundraising, I kept on doing different things, and it got bigger to the point where it was successful, and people stopped telling me that. And instead they started calling me like a selfless activist, so someone who was like trying to change the world and like a pioneer in something. And I hated that even more, because when I was a kid, I slept in on the weekends, I played more video games than I should have, and there wasn't anything remarkable about me. I was an average student who just had a volunteer project. And it really frustrated me, because when I was young, we used to look at people like saints and superheroes and people that are, beyond reality, that you look at and are selfless. So we're talking about superheroes, people like Batman, Superman. My favorite's Batman, by the way. But all these people that are like selfless, and they don't care about themselves, and they give themselves entirely to the causes they care about. And those people are remarkable. I envy those people. But I'm not one of those people. And at the end of the day, why Ryan's Well has been able to be successful, it hasn't been because of heroes and selfless people. It's been because of my neighbors, my friends, people that got involved with Ryan's Well and were themselves. And together we've been able to do so much by being ordinary. So I think it's one thing in life, you like to sum off problems saying, oh, someone who's a politician, someone who's a saint, someone who's more important than me is going to do something about this issue. When in reality, I think the people who make the biggest impact and have the biggest change are the people sitting next to you. Next slide, please. So a little bit more of the work we do with Ryan's Well is we build clean water wells and water projects of some kind. And we do that because water is something that leads to so much. It allows kids like Jimmy to go to school. It allows women to free up their days so they can do things like start businesses. It allows people to not get sick so they can go to work. And it's one of those stepping stones that if you don't have water, you can't do much else. So we've been doing clean water projects for the last 15 years, and we're still doing them today. We're doing different fundraisers and different things all around the world. And we've been able to have a big impact, and we hope to have an impact in the future. Next slide, please. So a story that I want to leave you here with today is a story that I heard when I was 8 years old. I was able to go on a television show. It was called The Galloping Gourmet. Has anyone ever heard or watched The Galloping Gourmet? No, that's okay. It's a very old show. But essentially it's this guy, and it was like a cooking show. So you got to go on, and he would have a guest on. So I got to go on, and I got to have free food, which was great. But before I went on the show with this guy, he sat me down, and he drew me this picture, and he told me a story. He said, Ryan, in life everyone has a cup and a saucer. It's like a teacup and a tea saucer, or I guess in Mexico, coffee cup, coffee saucer. And he said that for much of his life, his cup was overflowing into his saucer. So he had more than what he needed to live a happy life. he told me that he kept on refilling his cup from his saucer until one day he realized that it made more sense to pour what he didn't need into someone else's cup. So he changed his way of thinking, and he told me it made him a much happier man. So it's a simple way of saying if you have more than what you have, you give back and you share with others. I think the tricky thing about this is it's the easiest thing in the world to not realize when your cup is overflowing. To get caught up in the idea of I need to be even more successful, to be more powerful, to have more money, to have more control over my life, that we forget those things. We forget where we're passionate about, and we leave those things by the wayside. I do it all the time. I think what's important every now and then is to take a step back. And for me, it's water. When I can have a drink of water, it reminds me that a kid isn't that lucky, and that there's something that I can do to make a change about it. So if you find those things that you're passionate about, don't leave them by the wayside. Remind yourself. And then whenever you get to those points in life, remember to give back. You don't need to be a selfless activist. It's okay to care about yourself. It's okay to look out for yourself and want the best things for yourself moving forward. But at the same time, if you can make that time to give back, then who knows what it may turn into. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for listening to me today. Muchas gracias. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
¿Alguien que tenga alguna pregunta para hacerle a Ryan?
Do you keep track of those communities you help?
Sorry?
Do you keep track of the communities you help?
Do we give back to the communities we've helped?
Keep track.
Keep track. One of the most important things we do in terms of Ryan's Well, we've been around for 15 years, and how we've been able to survive is we started because there was a lot of narrative along the story. But people who donated 15 years ago are coming back because that's one of the only things we actually focus on is project work. If you're going to do something like drill a well and not have any capacity to make it last or any idea how that's going to happen, then there's no point in doing it at all. So what we do is there's a big part in training. So you get people involved from the community to build the well, to be part of a committee after it's built, so someone who's like a secretary, a treasurer, someone who's in charge of the security of the well, to make it last. And then with us, we do site visits a year, 5 years, and 10 years later. And we see what works, what doesn't work, and because it's not a magic bullet situation. There's a lot of different diversity all around the world in terms of what works and what doesn't. But it's a term of learning, and we've been able to have very good success. I was in Uganda doing projects with our partners this spring, so I was there for 3 months. And a lot of the wells that we did 10 years ago were still working, and we were doing a lot of site visits then, and so we're happy to keep on doing the work we do. But yeah, it's the most important thing.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Ryan, after school, what did you study? What is your major?
After school, what did I study? I went to high school in my hometown of Kentville, then I went to University of King's College in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Who knows where Halifax, Nova Scotia is? No? Okay. It's in eastern Canada, and so I went there for university. I studied political science and international development studies. I did different jobs. I was a delivery driver for a donut company. I worked construction, and then I moved to Ottawa, and I worked with youth, getting young people involved in politics. And then I started working with Ryan's Well in January, actually, with a lot of our project work and doing different things with education. So all over the place, but international development, political science.
So do you have some other job other than Ryan's Well, or do you take some sort of a salary from it to actually maintain yourself?
Sure. Well, I volunteered for Ryan's Well for 17 years, and then I've done different jobs over the years. So I was a delivery driver for a while. I worked construction. I coordinated like a day camp, where it was like a bicycle camp. That was a lot of fun. And then I worked in Ottawa getting young people involved in politics. And then this January, actually, so like 8 months ago, our project manager for Ryan's Well kind of decided to quit at a drop of a hat, and we needed to get someone involved. So the board was kind of like, I was sitting on the board, and they were like, Ryan, get involved. So I said, okay, because I didn't have a job at the time, so that I didn't really have an excuse not to. So I started working for Ryan's Well in January. So I was doing a lot of the project work. I was in Uganda for 3 months. And yeah, doing a lot of the fundraising, education, and awareness and empowerment now. So yeah, I guess I have been doing it for a job for 8 months. So it's still kind of weird. Yeah.
What was your brother's story?
My brother's story, Jimmy?
Yeah.
Ah, Jimmy. All right, so this is a side story, but it's a cool one. When I was in grade 2, we got pen pals, like I was saying, and my pen pal ended up to be this kid named Jimmy. I met Jimmy when I went to school, when I went to Angola Primary School when I was 9, and we had been writing letters for a while, and so when I went, we became pretty good friends. I went to the school there for a couple weeks, so we hung out, we played soccer, we played a lot of cards, and we became really good friends. And I learned on that trip that Jimmy was actually an orphan, and he was being raised by his aunt. But it's okay, because in Uganda they have very good family structure, and if your parents aren't around, there's someone else who's gonna bring you up. So he was doing fine. And so I came back to Canada, we kept on writing to each other for a couple of years, and then it got to the point, actually, this would have been 2002, 2003, in Uganda, and there was a lot of conflict going on with a civil war. There were people actively fighting the government and vice versa, and there was a group that operated by taking child soldiers, abducting children and turning them into soldiers, basically. And that group got to the point where they actually raided Jimmy's village, and he was abducted. So they were leading everyone off into the bush, and Jimmy drew through the ropes that were tying his hands up, and he ran off while they were shooting at him. And he slept in the bush that night, so in the forest. And then he came back the next morning, and the entire village had been burned down. And the people that were left blamed Jimmy for the village being burned down because the rebels burned it all down. And they told Jimmy that if he didn't run away, they wouldn't have burned everything to the ground, that now they had nothing left, and it's all Jimmy's fault. So he's no longer welcome in the community. So he would have been 12 turning 13 at the time, so it was pretty heavy load to have on his shoulders, but he was essentially exiled. And then we heard about this all 2 weeks later from a contact of ours who was doing water projects in a different area. And my family was sending a couple $dollars for his schooling. We thought we were meant to do more. So after a very crazy month, we got Jimmy to come to Canada on a visitor's visa to attend a conference. Then found out more about what actually happened and that he wasn't safe in Uganda. And Jimmy wanted to stay, and we wanted him to stay as well. So he claimed refugee status, and he became my brother. And that would have been 12 years ago now. He's an old man now. He's like 25 years old. And he got married last year. I was the best man at his wedding. And he's doing good. Yeah, so he's come a long way. So it's a crazy story, and it's pretty sad. But at the end of the day, he's the hardest worker I've known. And he's come, a long way. So he's doing good. Fun times. I guess I should mention this. There is a book that was written like 8 years ago that tells the story of it, and it just came out in Spanish 2 weeks ago, so buy the book. It's a kid's book, but it's still pretty good.
Hi. Have you ever had any problem with our government of the laws to be able to do the whales in the whole world?
Well, it's an important question, and one of the main reasons why we do work with Ryan's Well is we're able to go right to the source. So we're able to micromanage our projects, and people are able to donate for specific wells that we're able to do. We work with governments on a scale of municipality governments. So local municipalities, if you go to a lot of developing countries, for instance, a lot of the national governments, there'll be more corruption, a lot more people trying to take a cut. But municipal governments tend to have their feet held to the fire a lot more, so they're a lot easier to work with. A lot of the times it's just handshaking and saying, yes, hello, But yeah, we've had pretty good relationships and we've been able to do a lot of good work by going right to the source. So we haven't had a lot of problems, no.
Did you deliver all the wells by yourself? Did you deliver all the wells by yourself?
Did we only build the wells by ourselves?
No, you.
Me. When I was there in the spring, I was able to drill a few wells, which I was excited about. I worked for a while in construction, and I always like doing things with my hands, probably because I'm not the smartest person. But no, I was able to do that, and I really enjoyed it, because that's what I thought I wanted to do when I was a kid. I just wanted to go around digging holes and drilling wells. So yeah, I've been able to do a few.
I'm going to ask you a question. All the fundraising, you do it, or you have a team, or where do you get all the money? $7 million, it's a lot of money.
Well, over the last 15 years, we've been able to keep people involved. And another thing is, all the fundraising runs as well as done, 90% of it comes from private donations. So from schools, churches, individuals who hear and see about the work we do and decide to donate. And without all those people donating, we wouldn't be able to do all the work we do. We have a very firm focus on project work and getting all the money we can to do specific projects. So we don't really have a budget to have a great fundraising team, but at the same time, I don't think I would like to have it any other way. So if you're not focused on, doing the good work that we've done, then there's no point. So we're going to keep our focus on that and see how long we will be able to be supported.
When you realized how big was your project?
How old was I when I realized how big the problem was? Well, actually, when I was 6, I thought that one well would literally bring the world clean water. And I thought like that for like a couple of years. So I didn't think it needed to be big. Or I thought that, it didn't really, I thought the world was my town. So I think it was just growing up and learning, when you're 6 and then you grow up into elementary school, you learn more about the world you live in, how countries and how many people there actually are and all the different problems. So I never thought of Ryansville getting bigger. We were just trying to do the best every step of the way, and we just ended up doing a lot of good. We're still very small in the grand scheme of things, but I was just, you just figure out some things along the way. I don't think I ever really grew up. I'm still 6 and I still think we can bring the world clean water.
How do you decide in which communities you help?
How do we decide which communities we help? That's a good question. First thing we do is we work with on-the-ground local partners. And it's one of the most important things we can do because we only work where we're comfortable that our work is we're able to look back and 5 years, 10 years later, the project will still be functioning. So that's the first step, have a great partner. The next is to find a village or a school that needs a water source and is actively asking for it. And then we work with the community to see if they're prepared, if there's going to be leadership there, and someone who's going to take responsibility for the well. Because if you go and you drill a well and you say, this is this organization's well, it is a gift, here you go, it will not last. It will not last because people don't, they don't have ownership of that well. But if you go and you say, this is your well, and if it's going to last, you need to take care of it, and you give them the tools and resources to do that, then it lasts. But it's how we work is we look where the greatest need is, and if it can be sustainable.
Una última pregunta. How did you felt when you were 6 years, when you went to
When I was 9, when I went there?
Yes.
I actually felt a little bit embarrassed because I was walking down this road and there was this big celebration and everyone was thanking me, but in reality it was a lot of people that were involved in the fundraiser and I just happened to be the person who started it, so I was kind of like an ambassador. But I think I was what I was thinking about the entire time, I was actually looking for Jimmy because I just wanted to hang out with him and be friends with him because he was my pen pal. So I was just thinking about that, really. I was a kid.
Bueno, creo que no nos queda más que agradecerle a Ryan. Creo que he is a great inspiration for all of us. So when we want to do things, they may be done. Un aplauso muy fuerte para Ryan. Labor y por todo lo que ha hecho y por el gusto de que haya venido con nosotros. And I also want to give Ryan a book, which is a book that was written by the Jewish community in Mexico that includes all the social projects that the Jewish community has in Mexico. I know it's in Spanish, but maybe Google will translate it. Este es un pequeño regalo para la mamá de Brian. I'm sure Brian's mother has done a great job with him, and I just wanted to give her a nice present. Y ahora voy a pedir a Rosa Morales que pase, por favor.
Pues buenas tardes, gracias. Primero agradecer nuevamente a Ryan porque haya venido con nosotros aquí a la comunidad. Thank you, Ryan, again. Y obviamente, bueno, Edith, el trabajo que ha hecho junto con las otras dos maestras que estuvimos planeando esto, nos da muchísimo gusto que se haya logrado. Por ahí debe haber varias manos de los chicos que fueron a Ciudad de las Ideas. ¿Alguien de aquí estuvo en Ciudad de las Ideas? Sí, así que queríamos volver aquí y compartir con ustedes toda esta buena voluntad. Those guys were at City of the Ideas. So, Y bueno, agradecer aquí tanto a Universidad ORT como al Colegio Israelita de México el habernos dado este espacio. Confiamos en que va a haber muchas más ocasiones. Gracias. Y Susan trajo también este CD, que es la segunda parte, o sea, hasta ahorita a los 15 años, cómo ha cambiado el pozo, la vida de varias personas y cómo es que ellos trabajan para que haya muchas más respuestas de todo lo que han estado ustedes trabajando también.
No nos queda más que agradecerle a Ryan, a Susan y a Rosa que nos hayan prestado a Ryan y que esté acá, y todos aquellos que estén interesados en saber la historia y la vida de Ryan, de su vida con Jimmy. Aquí hay una mesa con libros, cuestan 100 pesos quien esté interesado en comprarlos. Eso es parte de la gran labor que hace Ryan, así es que si lo quieren comprar, nos va a dar mucho gusto.